After the huge success of Iron Man, which took the world by storm, it was time to look at the next hero that would be joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe lineup. This was of course Universal Studios' Hulk, or should I say the Incredible Hulk, which is heavily influenced by the TV show of the same name. But before we can get into talking about the Incredible Hulk, we need to take a trip back in the time machine all the way to 2003, with the release of Ang Lee's Hulk, which in that point was in development at Universal Movies for 13 years, and was not actually part of the bankruptcy deal that would have seen Marvel sell all of their important characters to other studios. So the contractual obligations for the Hulk were very different. Studios like Fox with the X-Men franchise and Spider-Man over at Sony have a certain amount of time that they have to produce a movie in or lose all licenses. Pre-production on the Incredible Hulk, which would be the sequel to Ang Lee's Hulk, started right around the time the first movie was released in 2003. Through the early process of developing this movie, a few of the things that were mentioned was bringing in General Thunderbolt Ross in some sort of major capacity. Also using the villain's Abomination and the Leader was a mandate. The studio this time was interested in an actual threat for the Hulk and not just him running from a bunch of humans and military equipment. Avi Arad, Marvel Studios, and Universal now set a date of May 2005 for the release of the Hulk 2. That date came and went, and on January 18th, 2006, Avi Arad confirmed that Marvel Studios would be providing all the money to produce The Incredible Hulk. The only difference that The Incredible Hulk would see would be that it's not distributed by Paramount. It is instead going to be distributed and held on to by Universal Pictures. And because Universal missed the deadline to put out the movie, Marvel had more say in what was going to happen with it, so they decided to actually ditch the Ang Lee version and retrofit the movie to now be part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Kevin Feige at this time would of course start headlining everything Marvel Studios was doing, and he was adamant that the next movie cannot feel like an Ang Lee movie, that one felt like a parallel universe one-shot and they could not recreate the same thing again. Moving on with Hulk 2, as was now known as The Incredible Hulk, a movie that would be a reboot of the character, Marvel approached TV and movie director Louis Leterrier, who had previously took meetings on with Marvel to direct Iron Man, but since he did not get that one, they saw fit to give him the Hulk. Louis Leterrier himself being a giant fan of the Hulk cartoon and also the live-action TV show, they thought he was a perfect fit. During the initial meeting, Leterrier was very reluctant to take on the Hulk because he was afraid he could not replicate Ang Lee's style. It was only after they reassured him that this would be his own take and his own vision on it based on Jeff Loeb's and Tim Sale's Hulk Grey that he took on directing duties. Leterrier was notorious on the set and the directing room while storyboarding, taking the exact storyboards and matching it up to the panels from the comic books. During pre-production, he also had a major push on making sure that the Hulk was represented in the same light as Bruce Banner, aka equally. He wanted to fully explore who Bruce Banner was, the inner struggle and the monster that is inside of him. Along with Kevin Feige, the two agreed that the elements of this movie would be about the injustice and the bullying of having someone like that inside of you, having all that power and strength inside of you and not realizing what you could do with it if you just happen to snap. Zach Penn, who actually worked on the original movie and has been working on various Hulk scripts from 1996, was actually brought on to look at this and try to figure out how the story would go. Tonally, they wanted it to be similar to the TV show, but at the time they were still playing with the idea, could it be a sort of requel, aka sequel, and a reboot to Hulk 2003? And some of those elements were kept in the final movie. Now, two scenes that were always prominent in his scripts that he wanted to keep did finally make an appearance in this movie, and those were Bruce Banner jumping from the helicopter to trigger his transformation, and the realization that he cannot actually make love to Betty because of the rage inside of him. Over the course of the next year and a half, various other writers and script treatments by Zach Penn and other people were submitted to Marvel. Finally, in November of 2006, a June 13th, 2008 release was set. This would place the film only a couple of months after the Marvel Studios' first outing, which would be Iron Man. And the only thing that they decided to keep that was similar to the first movie that Ang Lee directed was the fact that at the end of that movie we see that Bruce Banner is hiding in South America, and when this movie opens up, Bruce Banner is in the same predicament. Filming of The Incredible Hulk started on July 9th, 2007. Leterrier, being the trooper that he is, actually directed the movie with 4 different units with a broken foot. He made sure he was there every day and oversaw every single stage of the film. Right off the bat, they actually went to shoot in Toronto because David Miller, who is a giant Hulk fan and also happened to be the mayor, promised to be very helpful when they had to close down an entire street to shoot the Hulk and Blonsky fight, which would double for, of course, New York. Toronto was also used for various other things, such as the Culver University battle, which happens to take place in the school and outside of it. Also, the factory we see in the movie that is supposed to be in Brazil was actually a factory in Hamilton, Ontario, which was actually due to be demolished, so they used that for the interior scenes. Along with that, they also did shoot 1 week in New York City and 2 weeks in Rio de Janeiro for the opening sequences of the movie. Now, when it came to the movie, one thing was clear that Marvel wanted. They did not want to retell the origin of the Hulk, so that was actually condensed into the opening sequence of the movie. And that sequence just so happens to be loaded with a few Easter eggs. The first one being that S.H.I.E.L.D. does have devices to take out the Hulk, which were the property of Stark Industries. And the second, a mention of Rick Jones, who is an associate of Bruce Banner, aka Atom Bomb. There is also a notable Easter egg that was removed in the original cut of the movie. As it opens up, we see that Bruce Banner is about to take his life. He ends up taking a gun and shooting himself in the head. As the camera pans away, we actually see Captain America's shield frozen in ice. This would of course go on and be changed due to the fact that he wasn't actually on top of the ice, but more inside of an actual vehicle. Now, when it came to bringing the Hulk to life, Leterrier decided to cite Andy Serkis's motion capture of Gollum and King Kong as his inspiration for the Green Monster. Edward Norton and other people would do the motion capture for the Hulk, trying to convey the human emotion. Between Edward Norton, who was the Hulk, and Roth, who was of course Abomination, they did over 2,500 different motion capture takes of what the monsters would do during a giant battle. Now, since this was a joint partnership between Marvel Studios and Universal, there were a few disagreements before the movie would officially start shooting. Universal thought that you would need as big of a name as possible to be the Hulk, so they wanted Edward Norton, who was quite a big star at the time. Marvel Studios, on the other hand, had their number one pick, who was Mark Ruffalo. He unfortunately did not end up getting the role at this time, but that would change in the future. Once the movie was in post-production, a lot of material ended up going to the cutting room floor. Close to 70 minutes have never seen the light of day, much of which included fully shot and edited versions of the origin, and this is where the problems with the movie started to take shape, because Edward Norton was told that all the character development and depth would be kept in the final cut. Once this was apparent that this was not the case, Edward Norton refused to do any public marketing for the movie. So during The Incredible Hulk, we actually see quite a few mentions of the bigger Marvel universe. We see that S.H.I.E.L.D. is mentioned multiple times. The first time we actually see their equipment is of course by Stark Industries, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is the one funding some of the equipment that Thunderbolt Ross is using. And of course, quite possibly the biggest Easter egg in the movie is the serum that they give Emil Blonsky. This serum was another prototype and a derivative of the same thing that was given to the super soldier known as Captain America. And as it transforms each person differently, if you are a terrible person, you will look terrible. Thus, we got the Abomination. Now, speaking of the super soldier serum, that is actually how the Hulk became the Hulk in the MCU. Bruce Banner was originally working on the derivative of the Captain America formula, which went wrong and ended up turning him into the Green Monster. So instead of using the atom bomb, which of course is known from the comic books, they decided to take the TV show route. Now, in hopes of setting up a future sequel, we actually got to see a little Easter egg with Samuel Stearns, who actually gets knocked into some equipment and a little bit of juice ends up dripping on his head. This was of course a hint towards him becoming the leader. To this day in the MCU, we still do not know anything about his whereabouts. Now, while trying to build this giant Marvel universe, they also needed someone that could play Thunderbolt Ross. William Hurt would end up taking on that role, and he would come back in a future movie. But his most important scene doesn't even come during the actual course of the movie itself. Kevin Feige, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and what the Marvel Universe could be, decided to throw another Easter egg. This time not at the end of the credits, but right at the end of the movie. Robert Downey Jr., being thankful that someone gave him a chance after his battle with drugs and his subsequent career demise, owed a favor to Marvel Studios, and he agreed to make an uncredited cameo in The Incredible Hulk as Tony Stark. And he also agreed that upon advertising his own movies, such as Iron Man, that he would go out there and advertise some of Marvel's other movies, such as Hulk. And along with that, the cameos you would expect in a Marvel movie were there. Stan Lee made a brief cameo, and Lou Ferrigno did appear in the movie as a security guard, and he did voice the Hulk. The movie would end up releasing on June 13th, 2008, and it definitely did not set the box office world on fire. On a budget of $150 million, it only managed to make $263 million. But Marvel saw this as a victory. The Hulk was back home, and the movie was another step towards building a giant shared universe. And the Hulk would definitely be back in the future. Now, as was the deal with Iron Man back in the day, Sega did also produce an Incredible Hulk video game to tie in with the movie. The game would see a release right alongside the movie, releasing on Windows PC, Nintendo DS, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, the Wii, and the Xbox 360. It was an open world game much like Hulk Ultimate Destruction, where you could just run around and destroy anything you saw fit. Now, while the game was not perfect, it did do far better than the Iron Man game when it came to reviews. And if you had a save for the other game, you could actually get a nice costume bonus. So the Hulk now had a video game and a movie, so now it was time to see what was next. And the Hulk would have to pay back a favor owed to Tony Stark by making a small cameo appearance in Iron Man 2. The original intent for Iron Man was to make a trilogy, with Obadiah Stane reprising his role from the first movie as the Ironmonger. Monger was actually used in the first movie with the idea of setting up the Mandarin for the second one. Unfortunately, they did not go with that either, due to the fact that they felt it was still too soon to reveal the Mandarin behind everything. Jon Favreau said it would be like using the Return of the Jedi in Empire Strikes Back. It just wouldn't make sense to condense the story into one. But one thing was for certain, after the inclusion of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the first Iron Man, Jon Favreau wanted the S.H.I.E.L.D. organization to have a major role in the second movie. And coming off the heels of Iron Man 1, many fans, including myself, were wondering what was the next chapter that they were going to tell. Jon Favreau said that they would explore Stark's alcoholism, but they would not adopt the demon in a bottle, which was one of the alternate scripts for the first Iron Man that they decided not to go with. And during the promoting of the first movie, Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. would both cite the demon in a bottle and Stark's alcohol problems as one of the major factors of the character. But something they also did not want to explore due to the age of the character, because they believed that he would become a full-on alcoholic if this was the case in real life. So the way they decided to put pressure on Tony Stark and kind of hit upon the alcoholism was of course the end of the first movie, where he reveals his identity as Iron Man to the entire world. Another interesting thing they wanted to do was explore Pepper Potts moving away from Tony Stark and getting a boyfriend to see how unstable Tony would get. While ticking away at the early drafts of Iron Man 2, Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau had help from Shane Black, who would go on to direct Iron Man 3. During the course of Iron Man 2, he suggested that they do the Destroyer of Worlds style storyline, based on J. Robert Oppenheimer, who of course worked on the Manhattan Project. Now, right after the release of the original Iron Man movie, Marvel Studios announced the development of Iron Man 2, and they set the release date for the movie for April 30th, 2010. In July of 2008, right after Iron Man left theaters and San Diego Comic-Con, it was announced after numerous negotiations that Jon Favreau would officially be returning to direct Iron Man 2. That same month, it was also announced that Jason Therex would be writing the first script. He was chosen primarily as a recommendation by Robert Downey Jr., who had previously worked on him on Tropic Thunder. While work on the script and the storyboards continued, in October of 2008, Marvel Studios made an agreement to film Iron Man 2 as well as their next 3 big franchise movies in Manhattan Beach, California. And just a few days after this, the Marvel Cinematic Universe would see their major first piece of recasting. Going on to replace Terrence Howard as James Rhodes, aka War Machine, would be Don Cheadle. Now, to this day, we still do not know exactly what happened with this. Terrence Howard has said, and I quote, "There was no explanation. Apparently the contracts that were written and signed weren't worth the paper they were printed on." It is interesting to note though that Terrence Howard was the highest billed person on the first Iron Man movie, making even more than Robert Downey Jr. Entertainment Weekly did go on to say that Jon Favreau did not enjoy working with Terrence Howard, often having to reshoot multiple scenes and actually ended up cutting a lot of the stuff that the actor has done for the first movie. Now the story also got a little bit murky when it was reported that Marvel did actually go back to negotiations with him, as he was the highest paid and they wanted him back, but apparently it was Howard's agents that actually stopped responding to Marvel. To this day, we will never probably know the truth. But in 2013, Terrence Howard did actually go publicly on to say that Robert Downey Jr. took the money that was supposed to go to me and pushed me out. Now during this stage of development, the script was still not finished and there was a few ideas being tossed around by Marvel Studios. Originally for the first Iron Man movie, there was an Easter egg which included Fin Fang Foom. But the idea was ultimately abandoned for going to a more realistic sort of villain once again. A few months later, in January 2009, rumors hit the internet that Mickey Rourke and Sam Rockwell entered negotiations to play the 2 main villains of the feature film. A couple of days would go by and Sam Rockwell would reveal to the world that he has in fact taken the role of Justin Hammer for Marvel Studios' upcoming movie. Also saying that it was a no-brainer since he was originally one of the 3 runner-ups to play Tony Stark in the first movie and he was very bummed when he didn't get it, so he wanted to jump on the chance of being in the franchise. After this, Paul Bettany would go on to confirm that he is in fact going to be returning to voice Jarvis. A few days later, we got confirmation that Emily Blunt entered negotiations to play the Black Widow. She was unable to take the role due to previous commitments in Gulliver's Travels. The decision to make Black Widow a part of the movie was a late addition, as the movie was in development for about 6 years at New Line Cinema, with David Hayter, aka Solid Snake from the Metal Gear Solid video games, attached to actually be the one to make it. And during the development of that movie, he even had a daughter who he named Natasha after Black Widow. Another character that Marvel Studios, Jon Favreau, and Robert Downey Jr. agreed needed to make another appearance in this and have an extended role would be Samuel L. Jackson, of course reprising his role as Nick Fury. At the time, Samuel Jackson was unsure if he was going to be returning as Nick Fury due to some breakdowns in negotiations and how the contracts were structured. About a month or so later, we would get official confirmation in February 2009 that Samuel Jackson and Marvel have reached terms and he would be reprising his role in up to 9 upcoming movies. With everything starting to take shape, the movie almost lost its main villain, as Mickey Rourke was about to walk away from the movie for only being offered $250,000. But Marvel, not wanting to lose Mickey Rourke, decided to raise the offer and signed him on in March 2009. As soon as that announcement hit, another one followed. Later that same day, we learned that Scarlett Johansson has officially signed on to play the Black Widow. And in the report, it was stated that Black Widow and Scarlett Johansson would both be reprising their role in future movies, with the option to one of those movies potentially include the Avengers. And in April, right as principal photography was beginning, Clark Gregg, Agent Coulson, and Kate Mara both joined the project. With the release of the movie only about 10 months away, the pressure was on for Marvel Studios to deliver a follow-up to a movie that nobody thought would be successful. The bulk of the production did take place in California, but some of the other locations were of course the Edwards Air Force Base, which was used also in the first movie. Jon Favreau said that the Air Force Base was a major advantage because it gave you a real-world feel and you didn't have to do set design. Now another bulk of the production would also happen at the Downey Studios location. Now, one of the most memorable scenes in the movie, which was of course the 2009 Monaco Grand Prix, was originally intended to be shot on location prior to the race. Despite being awarded the grant to actually shoot there, this was retracted days before shooting was about to start. Marvel Studios, being on short notice, decided to keep this sequence as they felt that it was important to what was happening. Storyboarding and everything was done, all the actors being set to report to set. They chose to construct the Monaco Grand Prix race at the Downey Studios lot. Later on, a few months into already shooting the movie, John Slattery was added as Howard Stark, the father of Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark, and Olivia Munn was added in an unspecified mystery role, which the internet believed was to be Scarlet Witch. To create the giant look for the Stark Expo, Marvel actually used Sepulveda Dam, constructing giant green screens from hundreds of stacked shipping containers. For the interior shots of the Stark Expo, they actually managed to use a local school. The filming of Iron Man 2 lasted an incredible 71 days, with production wrapping on July 18, 2009. And at the same time, the internet got wind of some rumors that a post-credit scene was being taped that would include a large hammer scene in the desert, which was a direct connection to their next movie, Thor. Now that the movie was in production, the studio needed the best they could get, and they got the Industrial Light and Magic guys to create the visual effects for the bulk of Iron Man 2. Now for the Iron Man suits, they decided to do it completely different than the first movie. During the shooting of the first movie, there were actual giant physical suits that were there on set that actors and stunt doubles would have to wear. For the second movie, Industrial Light and Magic would actually create entire CG characters, but the actors would wear what they called football suits, which were generally just gimped down versions of what they had in the movie, with a lot of motion and CG capture technology on them. Marvel already having experience with this due to the Incredible Hulk, it was really a no-brainer to start doing it like that. Now deep into post-production, it was revealed that Olivia Munn's original role, whatever it was cut, and she was given a new role that would only make a small appearance for about 3 seconds in the movie. And this all happened in February, just a couple of months before the official release of the movie during the reshoots. Now the soundtrack for Iron Man 2 was very important to Marvel, and they decided to feature AC/DC right on the cover and prominently throughout the movie. And at this time we would also find out that the post-credit scene was directed by Thor's own Kenneth Branagh. Now while everything seemed to be going good for the production of Iron Man 2, this was not the case, as the previous year during the post-production stage of Iron Man 2 in 2009, on August 31st, the internet and the world got the major breaking news that Disney has officially bought everything Marvel Comics for $4 billion. This included creative rights and the ability to do whatever they wanted with the upcoming movies, the ones that were in production, post-production, and the ones that had yet to be made. Now Disney originally said that their idea was to pretty much use the over 5,000 characters that they had at their disposal to be able to produce new action figures, new cartoons based on their most popular characters, brand new video games, and they even said if Pixar saw an interest in producing something Marvel, they could totally do it. But with the success of Iron Man 1, there was already an idea that Marvel had to produce brand new animated TV series based on the characters that are going to be getting standalone movies. Thor was already in development, and Iron Man came out with Iron Man Armored Adventures. The TV series was quite a deviation from what the fans saw in the recent movie. For starters, everybody including Tony Stark, Pepper Potts, and War Machine were all based in high school. The TV series did go on to have a total of 52 episodes, and was highly successful in merchandise and selling off the rights to other TV stations to show it on Saturday mornings, such as the CW. But back on the movie front, there wasn't as much success. Disney, feeling that their $4 billion buyout gave them a say in what to do, they decided to go in and start re-editing the cut of Iron Man 2 that was seen. Mickey Rourke was very committed to the role, and he decided to actually put himself into certain situations to try to really get how the character would be portrayed. Over 30 minutes of character development with him and Justin Hammer were cut from the final movie. Certain scenes that alluded more towards Tony Stark being an alcoholic were entirely removed from the final cut. And during many of the reshoots, Disney felt the need to build up the next upcoming franchise movies such as Captain America and Thor, so more references and Easter eggs were added throughout the course of the film. And much like the first movie, there was inevitably going to be a video game published by Sega once again. And while the game was a marginal improvement from the original, it still left a lot to be desired. The game would go on to have an average of a 60 out of 100, and would see the release on the PlayStation 3, the Wii, the Xbox 360, the PSP, the DS, the iPhone, and the BlackBerry. As the games were not canon to the actual storyline that was happening in the movies, they were able to take liberties, so we saw the SHIELD helicarrier, we saw Crimson Dynamo, and we even got to see AIM. Overall, I think it is a pretty fun game to play despite its glitchiness, and I did actually enjoy having a good time with it. I would recommend it if you are a hardcore fan and just want to play something that might be fun but a tad bit buggy and can completely crash on you. And finally came the day, May 7th, 2010. Under the new leadership of Disney, Iron Man 2 was released worldwide. And immediately critics and fans alike took note of some of the problems with the movie. The underdeveloped and rushed plot of the villains was completely something that Disney had a hand in destroying. The numerous forced Easter eggs and references to future Marvel movies just did not belong and felt like they weren't organically added. Unlike the first Iron Man movie, which still has one of the highest comic book film review scores to date and sits tied for the #1 spot, Iron Man 2 was much more disliked by the critics, getting an average of a 7 out of 10. Perhaps it was the movie's expectations that it couldn't live up to the glory of the first movie, but I think in time people have gone back on it, much like myself, and found way more things that we loved and hate about it. At the end of the day, the critical reviews did not do much to impact the success of Iron Man 2. Produced on a budget of $200 million, the movie would go on to make $623 million worldwide, and would go on to be one of the highest DVD and Blu-ray releases that year on all the charts. Now, once again, towards the end of the movie, we would have a special treat that involved Nick Fury and the Avenger Initiative. Quite a few Easter eggs were added towards the end of the movie. There is a scene where we see Tony Stark and Nick Fury talking, and right behind them we see that the area where Wakanda would be located is highlighted. We also see that the trajectory of where Captain America's last sighting was is also one of the points of interest. Another one also points to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean to Atlantis, but nothing has come of that yet. And the one that would make everything official that the Hulk was part of the MCU was the same news report that we saw during the Incredible Hulk appearing right on the screen, confirming that Universal Studios' Hulk was in fact going to be tied into the Avengers and the overall grand scheme to build the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So join me for part 3 of this ongoing retrospective, where we will look at the first Avenger take his first step into the world of Marvel Comics, and his inevitable tie and connection to the God of Thunder.